very, very little clue of veganism in the sort of 2017, 2018. And the first thing that really struck me was how much carbon's being used. Like I saw a stat about the amount of carbon emissions that are generated through eating beef, and it just really shocked me.
Yeah.
So I started cutting out beef around that time, and then cut out all meat except for chicken by about 2020. And in 2021 went full vegan for three reasons. One is seeing the carbon impact. The second is when I realized how the animals are actually treated. That for
Mm.
me was just, I couldn't believe how awfully we treat our fellow animals on this earth.
Mm.
And that's really been the thing that's actually kept me going the longest through this. And then the third reason is health. So when I started researching actually how long it takes us to digest meat and what that does to our bodies, yeah, that was the third reason. I live in Bratislava, and when I announced to my mother-in-law that I'm no longer eating meat, that was quite a challenging conversation because most of their dishes, most of their food revolves around meat. It's quite a strong tradition, but she's been very supportive actually, and now cooks a lot of vegan dishes, which has been great.
How's veganism in Bratislava generally? Is it, I mean, obviously, like you said, you had the challenges with, family and so on, but is it something that's, well known? Is there vegan places popping up? What's the kind of supermarket offerings like?
Yeah, it's at the beginning. I'd say it's at kind of infant stage.
Hmm.
We have two great vegan restaurants here, and that's it. And then there's lots of your standard restaurants. Menus that most restaurants will have. You're lucky if you get a vegetarian option, let alone a vegan option. So it's very early days. And then supermarkets. It's okay. There tends to be a kind of small vegan section, a bit like this. The small gluten in a Tesco stores in Britain, they
Yeah.
have that gluten, like tiny gluten aisle. That's where even the big stores now are with vegan in Bratislava. But it's good, that is already an improvement. I've been here 3 years, and that didn't exist 3 years ago. So I think they're waking up to it for sure.
Just out of interest, does that lead you to eating healthier than you think than probably the average sort of, I don't know, say London-based vegan who's got a lot of options and a lot of processed options and all sorts of things going on at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't eat much processed foods at all. So yes, I yeah, it's basically lots of salads. You can get the processed stuff here though. It does exist. It's just
Yeah,
you got to go hunting for it a bit more. It's
yeah,
probably what long term. You got to go looking for it a bit more.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Did you remember that sort of first, like you said, that interaction with those stats around kind of beef and carbon and so on and the link? Did you go down that kind of like the route of documentaries and so on and so forth? Was that very much your path?
Yeah. So I was at a company called Look After My Bills when I first started this sort of route to veganism, and I'd launched that company with a couple of brilliant co-founders. We'd had the best ever deal on Dragon's Den, and we'd successfully exited to Go Compare. And while at Go Compare, I'd started looking around for what's my next thing. And I have a son. He's 2.5 now, Theo. But back then, my wife was pregnant, so it really made me question, where I was dedicating my time. And I left Look After My Bills and just started researching where I could have an impact. And I knew it was to do with addressing the climate crisis, because when I think about the world for Theo, and when he's
Mm.
my age, when he's 35, it's going to be a vastly different world, and probably much, much harder given where we're headed. And so I want to do my part to address that. And then I went down the rabbit hole. I started looking at carbon emissions and where they're coming from, and what's the impact of deforestation as a result of eating beef, and started just sort of talking to people about their own experiences and running something called the Climate Challenge, which was 30 challenges, 30 days for 8 people at a time. We ran 5 of them, basically free focus groups for me and for the people going through it, a way to live a more sustainable lifestyle. And we looked at lots of different things. We looked at the our carbon footprint, which is, one of the things that landed for me when I saw the carbon footprint. I saw how much food is a part of that. But we also looked at where our banks and our pensions are invested, and this is a slight tangent, but there's also a realization that 1% of my money is going to factory farming. So let alone what I'm doing with my diet, there's also money going there. 1% of my pension, not my money, 1% of my pension was going to factory farming. So there was this kind of dual impact. And then went down the rabbit hole, started watching all the documentaries, watched Cowspiracy was a big one. I know they got their stats wrong, but I think the overall message still lands. And the other one in terms of health that really helped was Game Changers. Game Changers was really fascinating to see the health benefits of going vegan as well. So that was the kind of the cluster of things going on that made me ultimately give up meat.
And so tell us a little bit about Mother Tree. Where did that fit into your kind of journey?
Yeah, so this was I'd left my comfortable job at Look After My Bills, and I was researching where I could have an impact. And we'd set up this thing called the Climate Challenge, and through that we'd realised the impact of our bank and our pension really on fossil fuels, but factory farming and things against the vegan lifestyle were also part of that. But my pension was putting 2% into Shell and BP. My bank at Look After My Bills, we were with Lloyds. They've put in over $1 billion a year into fossil fuels since 2016. So these are huge impacts, and I had no realization until I did the Climate Challenge, and suddenly lots of people going through the challenge were waking up to this and taking action and switching banks, and where possible switching pensions, me included. And that was the start of Mother Tree. So we launched Mother Tree March 2022. We built what I'm pretty sure is the UK's first and only money carbon calculator. So it shows you the carbon impact of your bank and your pension. And it's significant. So our sort of lifestyle carbon footprints for the average UK consumer, what we eat and how we get about, whether it's car or plane and such, that comes to about 10 tons of carbon per year. And for that same average UK consumer, when you look at the bank and their pension, that produces about 10 tons of carbon per year because of how the bank and pension are invested.
Wow.
So it has a really big impact. And it's similar for things like factory farming in terms of the money we're attributing it to through buying food versus through holding stocks through our pension or where our bank is investing it. So that's Mother Tree. We work mainly with businesses. So we look at where the business money's going. And then we work to make sure it aligns to their values. So, we work with vegan businesses who refuse to, they go to extreme lengths, amazing lengths. They even go to the point of saying we refuse to employ anyone who's not a vegan. Well, we make sure their bank and their pension also lines up with that philosophy. And then we save them money. So very often the banks actually doing the best work are offering the best interest rates to businesses and to consumers, which seems ludicrous, but the banks like Barclays, who put in the most to fossil fuels and the most to deforestation, are also offering the least interest rates to their clients. So there's a kind of win-win that we found.
That's incredible. So it seems to me that it's fairly opaque, the world of like finance for the general kind of consumer in terms of where their money is going. And I imagine there's some folks listening who will be shocked about the kind of 10 tons versus 10 tons kind of stat, that it's pretty much equal, your transport and your food versus your kind of your financial life. Because, we probably all think I think a lot of folks, particularly as we're in veganuary right now, there's probably a lot of folks coming to veganism who, and we tell them this, I guess, in the vegan community, at least at step one, that what they need to do is their food. It's food. That's what we talk about, and then it's clothing and so on and so forth. And we don't tend to. We kind of do make the link in terms of transport sometimes, like in terms of like habitat loss and things like that, and carbon, and those links are kind of made, but they're often made almost as a bit of an aside to veganism. Like the main bit of veganism that you need to do is food and clothes and cosmetics and this kind of stuff. But money feels like way down the track in terms of like that message landing with folks. How difficult is it to find out where your pension and where your kind of salary and so on, everything that you put into your bank account, are being invested?
So banks and pensions like to keep this really opaque. They don't want to be challenged on it. So it can seem quite difficult. And we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years to make sure for consumers, for businesses, it becomes increasingly transparent. So for banks is actually harder to find out as a consumer. But what we've been able to do is go into their trading platforms so we can see the exact project they're lending money to. So we have real clarity, is this bank lending money to this factory farm? Is this bank lending money to this leather producing, clothing factory? We get real clarity in terms of where that money's actually going. So that's for banks, and the consumers, it's impossible to access. I tried. It costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of complexity in terms of what's actually going on. But we've partnered with people like Mike Berners-Lee, who wrote the book How Bad Are Bananas? The Carbon Footprint of Everything. So we get those kind of databases and data resources to look at the picture for banks. For pensions, so counterintuitively, as a consumer, you can start to peel at least the first layer of the onion. So if you know the fund that you're invested in, and typically it's an alphabet soup of letters and numbers, but if you just post that fund into a web browser, the name of the fund, ideally Acacia, who plant trees when you search, but if you post it into a web browser and then look at for something like TrustNet, you'll see the top 10 companies that you're invested in with that fund. And that's how I realized, 2% of my pension was with BP and Shell, because it was in the top 10 companies that my pension was invested in. I had no idea about this until I did it. So it is easier to at least see the top level, the top 10 companies, and typically that covers about 15% of the overall fund. And again, for the remaining 85%, we've built systems to see, exactly where the pension's going, and then also to compare. If you switch bank or if you switch pension, what does that actually look like in terms of where that money would go, and what does the return profile look like?
Talking of, where does it actually go, and trying to make more ethical choices, and this is a personal one as opposed to like a business one, but I recall when I first discovered anything about banking being a potential issue, I first turned to Triodos, actually. But then later discovered that their sort of version of ethical didn't necessarily include veganism. So is that kind of another problem on top, is navigating your way through that somebody who's kind of quote unquote ethical in their investing still might not share kind of vegan values. There's a difference between those ethics and actually removing animals from that kind of that chain of events. Is that kind of another element of complexity that you kind of have to navigate?
It is another element of complexity, and the definition of ethical, the definition of sustainable, they're broad churches, and I think each company, each individual has a slightly different understanding of what that is. And so, we work really closely with the individual to understand their personal values, or if it's a business, the business values, because that then guides all of our research. And you're absolutely right. Triodos, they're a Dutch formed company. That's where their headquarters are. There's investment in non-vegan products. The Dutch economy is, a lot of it's built on dairy. So there are calls like that as an individual, as a business, you want to have more transparency than a company just saying ethical. Now, Triodos, even given that, are still a much better option than someone like HSBC, who are funneling, almost 10 billion a year on average into fossil fuels, who are funneling billions into factory farming. Triodos's impact is far less, but they are still funding non-vegan activities, which, as you said already, don't align to your values.
How about the kind of, turning to business now, the sort of the greenwashing element? How big an issue is that from a opacity point of view? Like, I'm just thinking of like, there's obviously Mother Tree who is set up with good sound ethics and wanting to do the right thing. Are there kind of folks in this space? I'm not wanting you to dig anyone out here specifically, but are there kind of folks in this space who are willing to kind of help businesses kind of greenwash? And I'm thinking of probably more in terms of carbon offsetting and this kind of thing. Like in fact, what drew me to that thought was I've seen a recent, I don't know if it's BP or Shell, but these kind of adverts where they're trying to paint a picture of they're building this like future world where electric vehicles and this, that and the other, and trying to sort of almost remove themselves from their behaviors, if you like. Is there kind of companies that are seeing the kind of green pound, if you like, and then helping businesses to kind of essentially greenwash themselves?
Absolutely. I think this is rife and is incredibly damaging to what we're, as a society, what we need to do and what a lot of people are trying to do in terms of how do we figure out a future where we can thrive, whether the weather's not completely messing up our food systems and we can eat healthily without hurting other beings. This is going on all the time. BP and Shell and other oil and gas companies particularly bad for it. They talk a very good game in terms of renewables, although they have scaled that back this last year. Both of their chairmen said they're no longer going after the sort of the renewable side of the business. They're going to prioritize profit, which is outrageous. And Client Earth took Shell to court, took the directors to court based on that. A really important court case that's still ongoing. But they still claim to be putting money into renewables. They are, but it's about 1% of what they put into fossil fuels. So anything where BP is saying we're doing our bit for the planet, it's simply not true, because they have to reverse those two. They have to basically reverse that ratio. It should be 99% going into renewables. It's a similar story for the banks. I saw just yesterday, Lloyd's put up a LinkedIn post about having green jobs within the bank. That's great, but Lloyd's continue to put over $1 billion a year into fossil fuels. Now, Lloyd's, of all the mainstream banks in the UK, have actually said we're no longer going to put money into future projects, but they're going to continue to fund their existing oil and gas projects. So there's definitely these contradictions that are coming out. And what I want to recognise, because greenwashing is quite, it's a bit like slapping a dash of paint across a wall, and that's important. And we should, that's the start of the conversation. There are banks like Lloyd's and NatWest who are doing really important things in the renewable space and the green space, but unfortunately continue to invest in fossil fuels as well, less than some of the other banks, but they still invest. So it's nuanced for some of them, but yeah, it's incredibly damaging, this greenwashing part. And we know how influential advertising can be to all of us. We're all led by that on some shape or form. So yeah, I think calling it out and getting real clarity and transparency on what's actually going on is really important.
Yeah. Are you seeing businesses, more and more businesses wanting to come and learn and get your support? And do you think that the scale of what you're seeing in terms of, like, if they are those businesses shifting, is that scale big enough to hurt these big companies to a point where they sort of exact change on their own practices, or are we still quite early on in that regard?
So we're definitely seeing an increase for clients coming to Mother Tree. We're fully booked for the next couple of months. We manage £290 million on behalf of our clients. We found routes to reduce 26,000 tons of carbon. I can't remember what the equivalent of that is. I'd have to look it up, but it's a significant amount. And that's been increasing at pace over the last sort of 6 months, particularly. That amount, 290 million, is small change for Barclays. But our big hypothesis here is we need to start talking the language of the chairmen and there's one chairwoman of the big five UK banks who continue to invest in fossil fuels. The language that they speak is pounds in their bank under management. That's what gives them the validation to go and continue their practices. And all of these banks have set 2050 net zero goals. Well, pretty much all of the chair people for those banks will be in their 90s. Nigel Higgins of Barclays will be 97. It's not their problem. It's not his problem to hit that net zero target. He set it for somebody else to do. It's ridiculous. He should be setting a 2030 target. Then it's his problem. Then he can go and make it happen. So, what we need to see is increased pressure on these banks, getting money out of the banks, talking their language. But we're also seeing other institutions taking action. So Christian Aid got out of Barclays at the start of this year. Cambridge University and Leeds University have left Barclays last year. National Trust almost left Barclays and then had a kind of U-turn at their AGM, unfortunately. So we're seeing big companies leaving Barclays. Our clients have done the same. One of our clients puts 30 billion through their accounts every year, $30 billion through their 9 banks every year, and have left Barclays. And that is a significant amount away from Barclays. So we are starting to see the snowball effect here. The snowball's building. And it's really important because, I want to put myself out of a job because all of the UK banks and the global banks have said, actually, we're no longer going to fund fossil fuel. We're no longer going to fund factory farming. We're going to put that money to actually doing good for society. Like that would be an incredible situation. And I'll go back to back with the CV and find out what to do next.
Is there a political challenge going on at the moment as well to all of this? So, and what I suppose the context of my question. So, we're seeing like a rise of like authoritarian governments across the world, sort of more and more right wing governments. You could include the UK in that, depending on your position. And with that, often that goes hand in hand with reducing kind of what's seen as the red tape around business and it's okay to be polluting rivers and it's okay to be doing this, that and the other from a climate point of view. Almost like you say, it's kicking the problem down the road, or in some cases not even recognising there is a problem. Is that a direct challenge that you're seeing having knock-on impacts in the financial world, or is that an element of, well, that's kind of what's going on politically, but underneath that there are businesses who kind of know the score and are just and know actually it's probably good for business if they intend on surviving past 2050 to do the right things? Are you seeing that, or is that kind of political maelstrom that's going on having big financial implications as well?
It's definitely having implications, but I also think there's a groundswell of people and companies who want to do the right thing, and it's magnificent to get to work with some of those businesses. It's really inspiring. There's 3 ways to change a society, and that's been the case since civilization sprung up: political, big business, or individual. That's it. Now, in the UK, currently, the government isn't playing its part in terms of what we need to do as a nation to create a future that isn't, 2 degrees of warming or higher. And we've already seen that. It's been, incredibly damaging flooding to the UK this week, way more than out of the sort of expected rate. We're going to hit 1.5 degrees of warming probably this this year because of the El Nino effect. That wouldn't be possible without human caused climate change. So 3 ways to change society. Politically, they're not playing their part in the UK. There are governments playing that part, Denmark, Costa Rica in particular. But okay, if the government aren't gonna do what they need to do, aren't gonna face their own responsibility, then it falls to business and individuals. Businesses, we're seeing increasingly businesses willing to do the right thing. And that is incredible to see, and that's driven by the employees and the individuals there. And I think actually, when a business does the right thing, we're seeing this increasingly with Mother Tree. It's another badge, it's another certification, it's another reason to show their customers that they're part of the good side of this, that they're on the good side of history. And we've seen that certainly for Mother Tree clients leads to happier employees, so more motivated employees, easy to recruit, better, the best in class. We've seen that leads to more clients, so it actually unlocks more revenue by taking the actions. And we've seen that it, in some cases, for our clients, leads to more investment. So these are competitive advantages, even if the politicians aren't willing to play sport. And then on an individual level, it's people like you, Jim, and others who are genuinely willing to change their lifestyle to stand for something more than themselves. And we need that. We need those people to ultimately change our society. It only takes 2% of people to, based on Malcolm Gladwell's work, to find a tipping point to make that a mainstream part. So it doesn't actually take that much to start a movement without the red tape, without the policies and politics involved.
I'm pleased with your hopeful kind of outlook. It does fill me with some hope. I want to ask a question based actually connected back to your Dragon's Den time. So when I was I'm recently lucky enough to be editing the Veganuary podcast. So shout out to the Veganuary podcast. It's a new episode that's out today, and it features Deborah Meaden, hence the Dragon's Den connection. And she was asked a question that I found fascinating and wanted to pose to you, which is kind of ultimately is growth a problem for us, from a perspective of, when we think about climate change, when we think about them habitat loss and so on and so forth, is our current measurement, if you like, in society the wrong one in growth? And until we change that, are we always going to be in this issue of spiraling towards a real kind of a challenge in terms of the habitability of our planet?
It's a really important question to ask. The short answer is yes, it's a problem. GDP, which is kind of the metric that we judge growth on, the guy who invented GDP admitted after he invented it, this is a flawed metric. He begged governments not to use it, but they took it on. It's a simple metric. It's too simple. GDP, just to give you one example, it's in the government's interest to keep the drug trade going because it funds hospitals and police and all the things around. There's an incredible study about it in the US that actually drives more GDP by having a drugs trade. It's insane. Which is the kind of outer limits of why GDP is a false metric for us. That said, we need to figure, we live in a capitalist society. The thing that I've seen that has most potential is the circular economy. So the donut economy, it's also classed as. Dame Ellen MacArthur, has an amazing foundation on this, where she's really making sure this message gets heard. And I genuinely think there's a way within our lifetime, probably within a decade, if we got the financing right, to get to that circular economy part where, we're talking zero waste, not net zero stuff, it's zero. And suddenly we live in a world that we can thrive in, and our perception of growth has changed in a really important way. But that's very, very hard to do. We're a species since, I'm probably going to get the timings wrong, but for about the last 250,000 years, ever since we left the Rift Valley in Africa, we've been expanding across the globe. It took us 10,000 years to get across to the outer reaches of China. It seems like a long time. It's not a very long time. It's in our psyche at some level to keep expanding. But that doesn't mean it has to be in our psyche to expand on things like GDP. We need a smarter metric for governments to face, and it has to be circular. We know that we can't deal with the waste that our society produces anymore. So it has to change.
What does it look like working with Mother Tree? When you start with a business, how do you how do you begin that work with them?
So first up, we take time to really understand the business. So for me, it's our first principle is understand before being understood, and so we take time to understand what's going on in terms of what are the values of that business, where are they currently banking, why is that bank important to them, what are the business processes of the bank, what's the risk appetite, what's the carbon impact of that bank. So we take time to understand, and we do what's called our MPS method. That's measure, prioritize, switch. So first up, we measure where the business currently is. And we look at pension banks and bills. Once we've got an understanding, once we've measured, it's the M of MPS, then it's prioritization. So then we're able to look, okay, all of market, we're completely independent. We've got researchers, like Mike Berners-Lee's consulting outfit, Small World Consulting, where we can research all of market. What are the options for that business to reduce the carbon, to save money, but also to align on their values? If it's a vegan-led business, okay, how do we make sure their finances are not funding factory farming, as an example? And also, what are the impact on the business requirements beyond that? Does it integrate with the accounting software? Can multiple business owners get access to the account? That kind of nitty gritty that where just you can keep the business as usual going. So that's the prioritization. Once the business is happy with the plan, we get to work doing the paperwork on their behalf. So we implement a lot of the things we did at Look After My Bills, where we're making sure the client is switching consistently and accurately to ultimately unlock those savings, both in terms of money and carbon. Now, our typical client saves about, well, actually, we just saved one client, an architecture firm, £30,000 last year, and we saved them 450 tons of carbon. So we're unlocking those savings for them. And then also aligning to their values. And then we're playing that back to the business. So we're letting employees and potential clients know, and we work with the business on behalf to do that, so it's set up in the right way. But we're letting them know the actions, and that we've seen that leads to happier employees and happier clients.
It's incredible work. And I think that the fact that, like you said, most of the time you're saving clients money, I think it's almost a no-brainer at that point. Like if you run a business, like why would you not just get it looked over by some professionals in the space who are going to help you move it into the right channel? Are you finding that roughly, the split of businesses, do they tend to be quite new businesses, or are you trying to unpick sometimes some really kind of dyed in the wool, forgive the non-vegan phrase, but kind of practices? Are there things that are actually quite deep rooted and quite difficult to extricate from a business?
Yeah, it's thank you for the compliment, by the way. I really appreciate it. It's a mix. So we have our biggest client, I mentioned already, puts $30 billion through their account. Our smallest client is a one-person band, one-woman band. And it's everything in between. We work on lots of different sectors. We're in the charity sector, accounting, lots of consulting firms. The thing that ties them all together is that they're values led. So we actually turn businesses away where they come to us and say, we just want to make money, or when we do the digging and actually what they're saying on the surface isn't what's happening in reality, we turn them away, because for me it's incredibly important that we work with values led businesses, and ultimately that's values led people. And so that's what ties them all together. So it doesn't really matter on the size of the business, it's more about the values. And the work will be different. So you already mentioned it. The work for a big business is more complex. There's more untangling, there's more understanding. For a smaller business, we move much quicker. Generally, it's much more straightforward for that kind of business.
That's awesome. So where would folks go about finding out more about Mother Tree and hopefully getting in touch if they're business owners and so on and they need some help?
Yeah, well, best thing to do is head to mymothertree.com. That's mymothertree.com, or email me, dan@mymothertree.com, and let me know if you've got any questions, and happy to start a conversation.
That's awesome. Well, I will make sure that there's links in the show notes for folks. So head down to the show notes, and you'll be able to find the website and so on. But Dan, it's been fantastic chatting with you. More power to you and Mother Tree. I think you're doing some incredible work, and I'm sure. Well, hopefully we'll see you doing yourself out of a job sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Jim. Pleasure to be on.